Hey everyone, it's Michelle, the Dreaming Dilettante, and welcome to the Dilettante's Home. On this channel, I like to share my houseplants, my love for houseplants with you, my journey with them, and how I've learned a little bit more about their care. I'm by no means an expert, but I do love to share my passion for all things green and houseplanty, and I hope you enjoy watching. Today we are talking about Dracena. Now, Dracenas are a fairly easy houseplant to take care of. They're pretty tolerant of a little bit of neglect, and they're pretty tolerant of most things, I would say, with the exception of overwatering, which is true for most plants. The Dracenas do prefer to be allowed to dry out just a little bit. Kind of like with a lot of house plants, if you put your finger in, like this one is completely dry, so this plant could use a water, and you can kind of tell their leaves start to kind of curl up, and the plants do tend to signal you when it's time for them to get a drink. So I recommend, though, if you're someone who likes to water your plants a lot, go easy on the Dracenas. As with most house plants, if they get a little sad because they're thirsty, it's a lot easier to just give them a good thorough drink and watch them bounce back than to try to repair once they've been overwatered and now their roots are maybe in a bad way. So I believe this plant is a Dracena sanderiana. Now, I am not 100% positive. The tag just said Dracena, but from my own research, I'm pretty sure it's a sanderiana. But if I'm wrong, please do put a comment down below. It does have a little bit of the white variegation. I picked this plant up at a big box store from what I kind of have dubbed death row, where if you have been to the big box stores, you know they tend to have a clearance section where they have a lot of plants that have either been mistreated, neglected, pushed to the back, or just overall are not thriving. A lot of times you can get some really good deals on plants there. I've picked up quite a few plants for my collection. You do want to be mindful of things like pests and stuff that you're going to be, because if a plant isn't healthy, they're much more susceptible to pests, and you don't want to be bringing that into your home where you're going to infect your other plants. So if you do buy plants that way, which you pretty much should do when you buy plants anyway, is kind of quarantine them for a little while, check them out when you're at the store, make sure you're getting a healthy plant. But if, like me, you want to throw caution to the wind and try to bring home and rehabilitate some of these plants, you can usually get some really good deals. And if nothing else, I always look at the pot that they're in, and this is a really nice, I don't know if it's a painted terracotta or a clay pot, but what's nice about this is that even if the plant doesn't survive, I usually kind of look at the price tag and think, okay, that's not a bad price for a pot in and of itself. So if I'm able to save the plant, which so far this plant is doing really, really well. It still has some marks, if you can see here, some browning on the edges and things like that. I was going to give it a repot today. This is all the old damage that the plant had had before. You can see right here. So what I'm planning on doing is trimming off any of the remaining damage from the plant. I've had it for a few months now, and I'm going to repot it up just to give it some fresh soil. It has right now some moss over the top as like a top dressing. So I'm going to repot that, and I thought it would be fun for us to do that together. And this plant I got a while back from the grocery store, and as I said, this one can use a really good water, so I don't think I need to repot it. I've given it some new soil recently. It just needs a really good drink, but overall there's maybe one or two leaves that have some browning that I'm going to prune off. Dracenas really take well to pruning. You can cut them back pretty well and they're going to still survive. They also can be kind of encouraged to grow bushier. So if you cut back some of the leaves, you're going to get bushier plants. And so you don't have to be too afraid if you're new to like kind of trimming back your plants, or you're not really worried about it. Dracenas are fairly forgiving, using clean pruning shears or scissors to just trim back leaves that are either damaged or maybe it's getting a little out of control and you want to kind of curl her back. You can do that. So Dracenas are a tropical plant. They're considered a tropical evergreen plant. They do well in a medium to low light situation, so you don't need to worry about putting these under grow lights. You don't want to put these anywhere where they're going to have sunlight beating down on them because you will scorch the leaves. As always, we would say like a bright, bright light. Like you can see the room I'm in right now, we have some bright light that's coming in. It's a natural light, but the sun's rays aren't hitting the plant's leaves directly. So that's the best way to kind of tell. They will tolerate a brighter room, but again, we don't want that sunlight shining right on top of them because it could scorch and burn the leaves. You want something that you're going to be able to water. The water is going to soak through. It's going to be able to reach the roots, and the roots are going to be able to get a nice drink from it, but there's no water that's really being like held as like a puddle inside the soil. So if you think about a mixture of some standard household potting soil, and you can also use some perlite added into it. I'm going to be using a mixture of some orchid bark and just some standard indoor houseplant potting mix. You don't want to use like garden soil or anything like that. It would be way too heavy for your plants. So a standard household potting soil would work great. Now for humidity, these plants will pretty much do well in whatever kind of humidity you have in your home. If you start to notice, say in the winter time when our houses, we have heat on and things like that, the houses can get very dry. If you start to notice browning on a lot of the edges of your plant, it could just mean they need a little more moisture. And in that case, you can move them to a bathroom or a kitchen. You could put them on a pebble tray, which if you're not familiar with that is, you just take like a little saucer, like the kind of that would go underneath your plant to catch any water. You can put some stones or some pebbles in there, fill it up with some water, and then you set your pot on top of it. The idea being that the water will start to evaporate out and increase the moisture for that plant individually. Of course, you could use a humidifier. These plants generally wouldn't need something like a humidifier. You could also just group them together, and they'll kind of naturally increase the humidity around them. But that's really only if you're noticing a lot of browning on your leaves and you think your house is maybe a little on the drier side. You could definitely do that. If you're in a desert environment or something like that, you might want to increase the humidity. So these would be great plants to add to your bathroom. The humidity that happens naturally from a shower would definitely help and make them very happy. But for the most part, you should be fine with just your standard household humidity. As I said, these plants are fairly drought tolerant, so you don't need to worry about, watering them every day or every week. Just stick your finger in. Like even the soil for this plant here is fairly, it's not completely dried out, so I'm gonna be repotting it, so I'm definitely gonna give it some water. But it's really, you just kind of want to stick your finger in, and if it comes out with some dirt on it, your plant's probably still good. If it's like a little wet dirt, your plant's still good. This one here, it is completely dry, so I'm going to be giving this plant a water. But as you can see, it's still doing well. It'll perk up a little bit more. Leaves will kind of, I've noticed with this plant, she will get she almost looks haggard to me. I don't know if anyone else can see it, but it's almost like I imagine her, like her hair standing out on the edge, and you give her a little water and that'll kind of even out. These plants really don't need a fertilizer. If you had a very mild, gentle fertilizer that you wanted to give them, you could, but they're not a very hungry plant, so there's not anything that you have to really worry about fertilizing. The best time to repot a Dracena is in spring or early summer. We're actually in late summer here, but I'm gonna repot it anyway. That's just the best time. That's their growing season. So during your winter months, you're definitely gonna notice that the plants aren't gonna be growing as much. You're not gonna have new shoots. This plant here, which is really exciting, you can see it's starting to develop kind of a stalk. So it's going to get taller. I believe this variety can get about 3 feet tall, is kind of like its max point, 3 to 5 feet tall. So which is fine for me. This is just, I love the bright colors on this one, and the change in the leaves. It's a little bit of a variegation here with the white, so it's really a unique plant. Okay, so as I said, I'm just going to be using some standard potting mix for houseplants, some indoor potting mix, and some orchid bark, just to make sure that it's a nice, well-draining soil. And as I said, this has some moss on the top as a top dressing, which I'm going to remove and just give this plant a repotting. And as you can see, it's got a fairly decent root system. I feel like it might be a little overwatered. So it's probably a good thing that I'm changing out the soil. That's something that you can always do if you think your plant is showing signs of, you know, overwatering, or it's wilting and you've watered it and you're not quite sure what's going on with it. It could be that it's too wet, and you can go ahead and just change out your soil and give it some fresh soil, and that can sometimes help if the roots are still, as you can see here, these are still nice and firm. They're not soft and mushy, so you don't have anything to worry about. If they're soft and they're mushy, if there's still some good roots, then you can try replanting it. And then I would always recommend just take some cuttings in case the plant doesn't make it. You can always propagate. This is the plant, and I think this pot that it was in is way too big. So I'm gonna just downsize the pot a little bit. I'm actually gonna downsize the pot quite a bit. I have this pot here, which I think will work better for the plant. As you can see here, there's a lot of room here for this particular plant. And what's gonna happen is that soil that I water is just gonna have wet soil soaking all around because the root system isn't big enough yet to soak up all that water, and you're more inclined to have some root rot. So I'm going to start off with some fresh soil here. I'm gonna put in a little bit of orchid bark, and you can mix these together ahead of time or in a bowl. I just kind of do it in the pot. So like a handful of orchid bark, handful of, this is just a standard indoor potting mix, as I've said. And then I'm gonna put the Dracena back in. And I'm only gonna bury it up to its original root line. I'm not gonna, you know, bury it any deeper. And again, I've done like a handful of the regular potting mix and then a handful of the orchid bark. And then I'm just gonna finish off with the potting mix to really give the plant some stability in the pot. Now, this soil that I'm using is pretty dry. It's not completely dry, but I am going to, it's always good when you repot a plant to give it a water so that the soil kind of settles in, settles around the roots. So it's always good to give it a bit of a water, but I'm not gonna overdo it with this plant. Because as I said, she was in a pot with a little bit too much water. And then I'm going to take a look and I'm going to trim off some of these brown leaves. And it's always good to use clean, sterilized pruning shears so that if you're working on one plant and it has some sort of disease, you're not going to pass that on to another plant. Kind of like a doctor washing their hands in between patients. Okay, so I think that's all the pruning I'm gonna do right now. I've taken off a couple of the brown leaves, so hopefully the plant will bush out from here. And yeah, and I actually like this now because you can see it's gotten a little bit taller. So now the only other thing I need to do is give this a water, and then while I'm at it, I'm also going to give this Dracena a good drink. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. As always, if you are interested and you enjoyed this content, please do consider subscribing to my channel, hit that like button, and I will be back again with some more content. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.